Ah,
All right, thank you everyone for coming. We have a relatively big attendance here in person and online. Again, thank you for showing up. I'm Kevin Ellis. I'm a PE engineer. I'm a transportation engineer here at NVCOG.
I'm Al Sylvester. I am a member of the Connecticut Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board, in addition to being a member of the Connecticut Public Transportation Council. And on top of all that, I am legally blind and I have obviously an abiding interest in complete streets and complete street design.
And I'm Bill Volker, coming here to support my friends. I also travel with a disability and come to be supportive and to try to gain as many advocates as we can to help us with improving the public infrastructure and getting us to come up with better design in our built environments.
Yes, so today, as you all know, we'll be talking about complete streets, and also we have varying different perspectives here, from ADA to engineering and planners. So if you can start the slide deck, we'll get started. And Al, you're starting us off on the agenda, talking about the directive.
Yes. Yeah, so back in August, well, let me go back a little bit farther than that. Back in 2009, there was a complete street statutes passed. Now, let me just read a little bit of this here. Complete streets, rather, acknowledges that roads are not just for motor vehicles. People walking, bicycling, and using transit have equal status as users of our roads and rights of way. The philosophy of complete streets sees mobility in terms of people as well as the movement of motor vehicles. This makes roadways inclusive. So I just want to stop there and talk for a minute about how roads and departments of transportation used to work. Well, they still do, but they're transitioning. But departments of transportation were really departments of highways, and the idea behind roads was the fast and efficient movement of motor vehicles. So a lot of sacrifices have been made in terms of real estate, not to mention people's lives and livelihoods at the altar of moving motor vehicles more quickly and efficiently. And then the complete streets movement came along in the early aughts. And, we got things passed like this form of legislation. We have things like the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board. But really what this all depends on is communication among all the actors in the construction of streets, the development of cities and towns, town centers, and places where people just use the streets as a matter of course. And one of the things that I took a great deal of encouragement from was that complete streets is part of a movement called universal design, where you design for everybody. And in doing so, incidentally, as much as in any other way, you get design that is friendly to people with disabilities. Now, we still have a long way to go toward getting people with disabilities full and equal access. But I take a great deal of encouragement from the direction in which we're going. So Public Act, this comes from Public Act 09-154. And what this did, it codified in statutes the accommodations for all users that will be a routine part of planning, designing, construction, and operating activities of the state's highways for state and municipal projects. This treats motorists, transit users, pedestrians, and cyclists as equal users of our streets. Now, this is what it looks like on paper. What it looks like when it actually hits the street is often a different story. And of course, it's far more complicated because of all the players with whom departments of transportation and local officials have to communicate. So departments of transportation, we'll take Connecticut as an example, they work through their regional offices. Now, regional offices have a certain way of doing things, and headquarters has, they get the legislation, they get the policies, they talk with the suits, they mingle with the legislators. So, they know where the latest directive is coming from. People at the local offices, that stuff trickles down a little more slowly. They have their habits and their ways of doing things. They have their relationships as well. And one of the things that we on Bike and Ped Board have discovered is that is one of the most important links where communication has to happen, because people are used to doing things a certain way. And when you ask them to make a change, it interferes with the things that they've been used to. And Connecticut being the land of steady habits, We got a lot of that. We got a lot of pushback on projects, simple things. Like restriping for 11-foot lanes. Now, 11-foot lanes are a great idea. 11-foot lanes. There's enough room for traffic and it gives you a little bit more room along the shoulders for pedestrians and cyclists. But the idea of the 12-foot lane is so deeply ingrained among the engineers and the people who do the pavement projects, that it's very difficult to get them to adapt to 11-foot lanes. But the good news is they have. Over the course of time, these things happen where people adapt, people change, staff changes. We had a wave of retirements back in 2022, and that really resulted in a significant change in attitude at DOT, moving from the Department of Highways to the Department of Mobility. And this is the thing, this is what we're all about. It's all about mobility. And in addition to giving more people mobility, it also helps for economic development, because the more people you have walking and bicycling, they move slowly. By moving slowly, they get to see what's around them, which is good for things like mom and pop shops. You're gonna get more people going into your mom and pop, walking past or bicycling past than you are when they park their big honking SUV right in front of you and they can't see the front door because it's too low. So some of the elements of complete streets that we have in particular interest in, of course, are sidewalks, crosswalks, and lighting. We have transit stops, bus shelters. We can talk a little bit more about that because there is a program underway in Connecticut I'd like to talk a little bit about. Bike racks, bike facilities, of course, plazas, parks, and public spaces where people get to gather. And the important thing about public spaces too is give somebody a place to sit. If people have a place to sit, they're more likely to interact with others around them. And then that's how you get more gatherings. That's what happened in Times Square where 7th Avenue and Broadway meet. When Jeanette Sadiq Khan was transportation commissioner for the city of New York, they decided that they were going to replace cars with chairs and tables. And it's been phenomenal. I mean, of course, there will always be those who will grumble and have a hard time about it. But it's been great for people who just want to, they just want to chill. They want to check out the city. They want to listen to the Naked Cowboy singing play. And, these are how these opportunities are presented. And these are essential elements to complete streets. So we have landscaping, street furniture, as I just mentioned. That it's not just chairs and places to sit, but it's stuff like sculpture and murals and we don't have honor boxes very much anymore, I don't imagine, but it's the placement of stuff like that people use and see. And you put it in a place like that where people, gather. Soon enough, you're gonna have consistent and larger gatherings of people. Traffic lanes and controls, as I mentioned, 11-foot lanes. There's also the concept of the road diet, with which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. An example of that is North Main Street in West Hartford. It is 4 lanes. It was 4 lanes, 2 lanes going north, 2 lanes going south. And the road diet turned that into 1 lane going north, 1 lane going south, and a center lane, a center left turn lane. And that allowed enough room in the shoulders for, I wouldn't be inclined to put a bicycle lane there because of the speed at which traffic moves. But it has resulted in a significant slowdown of traffic. And people are, they're very good about using sticking with the 2-lane concept as opposed to the 4-lane concept, which made it terrifying to walk down the sidewalk because there's virtually no snow shelf on a lot of North Main Street in West Hartford.
Maybe just a quick question.
Yeah.
We have different categories of streets, right? So the 11-foot
Yes.
lanes, we have just used a broader category, local streets, collector streets, arterial streets. So under what scenarios would the 11-foot lane be more appropriate?
Generally, they'd be more appropriate for the local streets. But I wouldn't rule them out for certain arterials.
I'm wondering even if the 11-foot lane has a traffic calming effect.
Yes,
I would guess in certain urban environments, particularly, I'm here in downtown Waterbury.
Certainly.
So I think an 11-foot lane might be a good design here.
Yeah, so like you just mentioned, 11-foot lanes are a good method of traffic calming. Just a narrow lane means vehicles will drive slower. down those lanes, so implementing them where you want traffic to be slow, or what kind of regards to what kind of street category label we assign to it. So anything in, like, for example, downtown Waterbury, an 11-foot lane would be beneficial because downtown is a place where people are walking, gathering of all different mobility types, so you want to have traffic accommodate those types of people.
Absolutely. And another thing to keep in mind as well is whether it's an arterial or a local street, if it's long, wide, and straight, then that suggests a different speed at which people are going to go without regard to pavement markings than if it's narrow or curved or has trees. The tree canopy gives you a feeling of enclosure. When you have a feeling of enclosure, you slow down organically. Speed limit signs are, their effectiveness is very limited. Because what people look at is the road ahead of them. If it's wide, straight, and long, they're gonna be a little more lead-footed than if it's narrow, curved, and has a tree canopy or some other form that makes it feel enclosed. And thus that underscores the value of something like a chicane. The chicane is a great idea for a street. There's a street, South Whitney Street in Hartford. It's a 24-foot wide street. And because it's a cut through and it has the double yellow line, people used to drive down there at excessive speed. So what the city did was it installed a chicane and had parking where it had once had parking on one side of the street and now put parking on two sides of the street. So you have a chicane that goes a certain distance, and then there's a curve. You have to curve to the right because parking moves from the right to the left side of the street. And that's resulted in a significant slowdown of traffic. So it really, along with the street characterization, you have to look at the environment in which it's placed to see about the logic of the 11-foot lane, to see whether it works for you and your municipality. So pedestrian access. Well, good pedestrian access depends on a number of things. Connected networks, specifically sidewalks. Sidewalks are a great way to give you connected networks. There are a lot of towns, even suburban towns in Connecticut, where you'll have a stretch of sidewalk and then suddenly it ends on somebody's front lawn. So if you want a good pedestrian network, paying attention to sidewalk connections is a very important thing to do. So we have continuous smooth surfaces, sidewalks, again, crosswalks, signals, mid-block crossing where they're needed. That's a really important one. So I'll just give you my own personal logic for mid-block crossing. I do quite a bit of walking on Farmington Avenue in Hartford and West Hartford. And a lot of it is 2 lanes, 2 parking lanes on either side and a median in the center. Now, when you get to the intersection, some of the intersections you have where there were 2 lanes, there are now 4 because people stack to turn right, left, or go straight. Mid-block, if there is an island in the mid-block, I see that as a form of pedestrian safety. So I will often cross mid-block because it's easier for me to see traffic coming because I have to assess the situation slowly because the way things develop based on the way I see, they develop very slowly for me. So a mid-block crossing gives me the opportunity to get from the sidewalk to mid-block, and then I can look to my right and see what's going on in terms of traffic and see if I have enough time to get to the other side. Intersections, at an intersection, one of the things I've discovered I have to do is when the light changes, I have to wait 5 or 10 ticks because there's always a light runner coming, or there may always be a light runner coming. So it's complicated. And that's why the mid-block crossing, wherever it's available, is something that you really ought to consider if you're doing a street design. So bike facilities, I don't really have a lot to say about bikes because I haven't gotten on a bike since I was in my 20s and a little less cautious in my approach to getting from here to there. But I just wanted to mention that for bike facilities, there's the bike route, there's the bike boulevard where you have actually 2-way bicycle traffic. Shoulders are a great place for bicycles. Again, depending on the speed at which traffic is moving. On a 24-foot wide street, that is, long and straight, it might be less desirable to have bicycle lanes, although people will use them. And there's also the concept of sharrows. Sharrows are great on narrow curving streets. On long streets, to be honest, they're a waste of markings because it doesn't really do anything for drivers. It's like another sign. Yeah, you're gonna be sharing the road with bikes. Oh, where are the bikes? So you're not always looking, especially if you have a habit of using that street and you're used to not looking for the bikes. The sharrows may or may not help you look for the bikes, but as they've been studied, the people who studied them have discovered that they have very little effect in terms of getting people to pay attention to bicycles. So that's my spiel on sharrows. And then, of course, we have bike lanes with physical separation. Bicycling behavior at intersections is something that you might want to pay attention to as well, because bicyclists are in the habit of treating a traffic light as a stop sign and a stop sign as a yield sign. And again, I mean, they approach with caution. And if there's cross traffic coming, obviously they're going to stop and abide by the traffic light. But they have certain habits, so you want to keep those in mind. And if you want to continue to page 2 on the handout entitled NVCOG Lunch and Learn Complete Streets in Perspective, you'll get a little perspective there on what happens to pedestrians when they encounter cars in a way they'd rather not. So in a motor vehicle crash, a pedestrian is 25 times more likely to die when you're going 50 miles an hour. You can see the chart below there, how the likelihood rises. Not quite exponentially, but it's a steep curve. And below that, this is one of my favorite pictures in terms of giving you perspective on how much space people take up. On left-hand side there, you see how much space 40 people take up when they ride the bus. They fit in one bus. In the middle there, you see 40 people on bicycles. And finally, on the right, you see how much space 40 people take up when they each drive their own cars. So that illustration to me speaks volumes. Would you guys want to add anything in terms of pedestrian infrastructure? And
Just real quick, bike lanes, we call them bike lanes, but they're really multi-purpose facilities, okay? How do I know that? Because I'm on them all the time. And I've actually had people try to tell me in a wheelchair which side of the lane I should be in. And of course, anybody who knows me knows how well those conversations generally go, okay? Because, those facilities are designed for people who are walking their children with baby carriages, people walking their dogs, people riding bicycles, people in wheelchairs. They are multi-purpose facilities. I'm often going to be in those. And even in the city, I might choose to be in what's called a bike lane. There's a few things that we have to fight against, which is why right on the right side of the road to me is meaningless. There's cross pitch that's designed in all these surfaces, okay? You guys wouldn't necessarily feel it or experience it as you're walking. You certainly wouldn't know it was there when you're riding a bike. I'm going to tell you, when I'm in a wheelchair, I know. I have to fight cross pitch, and I also have to fight, horizontal and vertical pitch all the time. Cross pitch pulls me to one side of the trail or the other. And I'm going to favor the side of the trail that makes sense for me, not what makes sense for some guy jackassing his way toward me on his bicycle about to tell me which side of the road I should be on, which doesn't go well. So you got to remember that there's a lot going on these trails. We call them bike trails, but I'm going to tell you, my attitude is no. These are multi-purpose facilities built with public funds, should be made and designed for everybody. So, and there are no rules of the road. The rule of the road is to design them in a safe way. And remember that there are multiple users on all of these facilities. So.
Yeah, that's on the bike in the bike and ped world, that's how we speak of them, as multi-use trail.
Yeah, the other thing, you talked about the mid-block crossing,
Yes.
right? Which a lot of us wouldn't choose to use. But think about sometimes when you're driving a car, how confusing a normal intersection could be, particularly in a place like Waterbury. We've got one-way streets, you've got people coming in off highway ramps, a whole bunch of stuff going on. You get the green light and you're still gonna look, right? Those of us with disabilities, and I reminded these guys this, we are low and slow, okay? low and slow. I'm lower than most people driving in a vehicle. You wouldn't necessarily be looking for me to see me, okay? And we are slow because we have to approach our crossing very carefully. It's not just about the intersection and the movements in the intersection. We've got to find a safe place. Is there a ramp? Is there a good ramp? Is it a well-maintained ramp? Is there a pothole? Okay, Al has to do the same things. He's got to discover where it is he can get across that intersection. So we got a whole bunch more going on sensory wise when we approach these intersections. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the transitions into the complete street areas. But remember, and I like to use the word low and slow. Just remember that. Okay.
Yeah.
People with disabilities are lower and slower. We can't always be seen, and it takes us longer to make decisions. Not only to make the decision, but then also to execute our way across.
Precisely, yeah, no, that's very good, 100% agree with that. There's a lot going on with us,
Oh, yeah.
it's sensory wise, and yeah, it's a lot of stuff to process, and we
It ain't all fun.
we process it differently.
Well, yeah, the thing I say all the time is I see a lot from here, not all of it's good.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree with that. So what I did, if you look on this handout, you'll see that I actually lifted some language from the executive order on design criteria for complete streets. This comes from DOT. It was issued last August, sometime last August, and it really lays out complete streets principles very well. And it applies to roadways in urban areas, urban clusters, rural town centers, pedestrian safety zones where pedestrians are legally allowed. Also for bridges on urban federal aid highways, rural routes carrying more than 1,000 ADT. Pedestrians are legally allowed, and where the scope of work is beyond bridge cycle maintenance or condition-driven maintenance as identified in the AASHTO Guide to Bridge Preservation. So there's a lot of technical language in here. This is the policy statements. It's effectively an executive summary, and it outlines pretty well where the state expects its contractors to abide by complete streets principles. There's a set of design criteria. Obviously, it's a 12-page document, and I didn't include this here because it's really outside the scope of our discussion. But it's something that I can tell you DOT takes seriously, and we considered it a major victory for Bike and Ped to actually have the commissioner adopt this and state use it and apply it as a policy across DOT. Now, getting it to actually happen on the street again it's more complicated, and in a way, it too is slow and slow because it trickles slowly through the bureaucracy, and it goes at the lower level you are, and by lower I mean the closer to the actual construction, to the actual street, the longer it may take, depending on on who's there. I mean, this works because of relationships. And there's some district offices that have more of an old school way of doing things, that are more acclimated to doing things a certain way. They're a little bit tougher to bring around, but you can ultimately bring people around. And as I've said before, and I hope I'm not repeating myself too much here, CONDOT is moving from a model of the highway department to the mobility department. And this is really a big step in that direction. And with that, I think this is as good a place as any to pass the baton on to you.
Let me just touch on it
Yeah,
real quick,
go
though. The DOT, after 4 years of public service, have had to interact with them on many different things. You don't always know who you're dealing with. Sometimes you're dealing with the funding guys who wouldn't necessarily understand what on the ground stuff is. We're lucky enough in some of the projects that we worked on to deal with really local guys that were very, very good with this type of stuff and understood the accessibility issues, were really good at the design, but you won't always interact with them. So, and sometimes you need to be your own advocate. You need to be own advocate for a regional project or a municipal project. You really got to stick your neck out sometimes and force them to respond to good design challenges. So.
Absolutely, yeah, 100% agree.
All right, so before we So I'm gonna be talking about some project examples upcoming, but first I'm gonna see if there's any questions from anyone here in the room or online about what we're just talking about with Al.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's you.
Yeah.
You gentlemen ever discuss with the new mix group?
That is not familiar to me.
You're not?
So we at the agency, we've been working with the new mix design team in various ways, and we've been working to get a lot of good local projects in the city of Waterbury to be more pedestrian friendly and more complete streets. A lot of these projects are pretty early in the design phases, but it's something that we are working on with the state and with their consultant, and we're trying to get some good projects moving forward.
Because I mean, we've had numerous, excuse me, numerous meetings.
Mhm.
Locally and by Zoom. And this sounds like to me that you should be involved in those discussions.
Yeah.
Because they're making a lot of presentations. But to me, it's pie in the sky.
This is the new mix group.
The new mix
Yes.
group with this out to 2035, how
Yeah,
many billions they're going to cost? It's
Yeah.
going to cost. Yeah, I mean, they wanna reroute. Obviously, between the bridge,
mhm.
interstate. 8 and 84 and so forth is just mind boggling to me on what they're planning. And it's a big project, there's no question about it. But I mean, hearing you talk about this makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
But with them, I don't know if they would incorporate that.
Where's the initiative coming from? Is it federal, state?
No, state,
Yeah, it's.
I'm
it's-
sure there's federal dollars included in that,
Mhm,
but
certainly.
I mean, our tax dollars, obviously. but
Well, yes.
That's another story.
All right.
So I know, like I said, we as an agency, we've been providing comments continuously throughout the new mix project. And a lot of these comments are complete streets oriented about designing for all. And then I know the city of Waterbury has been participating as well. They've been making a lot of good comments in regards to complete streets. So like you said, it's a very big project. There's a lot going on in it, but we're stating our case when we can.
No, I mean, it's, like I said, it's, to me, this is interesting information you're giving here.
Mhm.
And it's the first time I'm hearing it. And now all of the discussions that we must have had, I gotta say, at least a dozen meetings over the course of the last couple of years with them.
Yeah. I mean, as advisors, the Condot, we are not necessarily like strictly project oriented. We are interested in projects. But what we're more interested in is developing awareness among DOT staff about what bicycle and pedestrian perspective is all about. So sometimes, we don't get as much into the nitty gritty, which is why I'm not familiar with the new mix group. But, we're trying to move Condot in a certain direction. And I'm pleased to see that they are willing to do that. So I would like, I'd like to see some more of that. I mean, a group like New Mix, it sounds as if they are maybe into they're working at a different level. It's not necessarily, they're more conceptual, if you will, than on the street and what pavement markings look like and where they're placed and what time in the development cycle to put them there. So I expect something a little less concrete from them and more conceptual, but I'm looking to, I want to see what kind of stuff there.
And as far as safety is concerned, and this case has come up a couple of times, we had a few discussions in the local neighborhood meetings. South Main Street, you're familiar with that here in Waterbury, where they just made the greenway?
Yep.
There is no barrier between the
Yeah.
road and the greenway.
Mhm.
What they did is they put a strip, maybe about 3-4 feet of grass to plant the trees. Well, a lot of the trees disappeared, obviously. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of ruts in the grass. What about the pedestrians? We have brought up many times about putting guardrails down there.
Yeah.
You know what one of the comments was? It's not environmentally correct. What's that got to do with safety?
And I think this is kind of what Bill was talking about earlier. It depends on who you're talking to at DOT. Some people
Yeah.
are on board, some people are not as on board. And we have noticed it, we have talked about it as well. You just have to keep advocating, and that's part of the point of this lunch and learn really is building advocates, because Obviously, the more people you have who are looking for these sorts of things out in projects or in just out in the real world, you have to, like Bill said, stick your neck up there and make these comments, and you just got to keep trying. And sometimes it can feel very fruitless, but you have to fight the good fight.
Let me give you my easy wise guy answer, okay? When the guy at DOT or whoever made the decision not to put the guardrail, somebody's in a wheelchair and he's out there on South Main Street, he's gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
That's all I can tell you.
Yeah.
You'll see it when you need to, sadly,
I know,
but that's my experience.
that,
It's the guy's parking in the handicap spot, he only needs it for a minute. Oh, really? I need it for the rest of my life. You want to
Mhm.
compare the two?
Exactly.
yeah,
That happened. I see that all the time.
Oh.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I know, but yeah, this is what we're all about on Bike and Ped.
why we do
What's
this,
going on
you
the
know,
street and being advocates.
we want you to argue more.
Yeah,
And by the way, you can use the line I just used. You'll know you need it when you're in a wheelchair. You'll have somebody in your family someday that will need this. Or a walker or some other assistive devices they're gonna need.
Well, there's a few of us that are handicapped,
Hello,
obviously not as severe, but it's still
sure.
handicapped. We have to utilize it whenever we can, obviously.
we're forced, don't ever underestimate us.
Yeah.
The other thing about which we need to remind people that is that everybody is a pedestrian sometime or other.
Mhm.
You're walking from your car to to the theater, to a ball game. You're a pedestrian. Going to your car, you're going from the ball game to your car, pedestrian, you're riding the bus. You're a pedestrian. So it's everybody, it's not just those of us who walk to get from here to there. It's everybody.
You have a question? Okay.
Any other questions here or online before we get to some examples? All right, so we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, I'll be talking about a couple of project examples. I'll be talking about two today, and the first one is actually right here in Waterbury. If you're in the room, it is that way, just like a couple blocks. So after this presentation, you can of course give East Main Street a nice little walk. So like I said, East Main Street in Waterbury. And so this project has been designed, built, and completed. So I'll be going to a couple of before images and talk about them, and then talk about how a lot of the issues were addressed in the after. So next slide. So this is a before, like I said, before image along East Main Street. This is looking to the east on the eastern side of the project corridor. And as you can tell, this project actually has a lot of good, what I call bones in it. In a complete street, you want street trees, you want enclosure. A lot of these things were there, but that does not mean it can't use some improvement. So here we got some trees along the roadway. We'll be getting a better picture of the roadway in just a second, where I'll be talking more about the roadway itself. Next slide. So again, this is like across the street near the Palace Theater, before construction was done. Again, a lot of trees in front of like the UConn campus downtown. Again, good bones for a complete street. It certainly is more complete than other streets that are out there, but it does not mean you can't take the next step and make more improvements. Next slide. So this is where we can start to see some of the reasons why the project occurred. This is looking on East Main Street, looking west towards the green. The first thing is the road is 4 lanes wide, which is a very wide downtown street. Talking earlier, if you're trying to cross this crosswalk in the screen here, it is very hard to see what's happening. A, it's just wide and there's a lot to process, but B, there's people parking on the outside lanes where they probably shouldn't be parking. So you run into visibility issues, both for pedestrians trying to cross the street, as well as motorists looking for pedestrians on either side. Additionally, you can see the road is actually made of brick pavers. This is a bit of a toss-up of a plus or a minus. Obviously, the plus is if you have a different material, cars aren't used to going down that material, so they will slow down for pedestrians and other users. But pavers as a roadway is a maintenance nightmare. If you have frost heave over however many winters this road is out here, the pavers start shifting up, down, left, right, and sideways. And that actually leads to ADA accessibility issues. One of the provisions in ADA is if you have a 1/4 inch vertical difference between two objects, it is no longer ADA compliant. So imagine you have this roadway of like hundreds or thousands of pavers all doing their own thing every winter. You're going to get your 1/4 inch differences everywhere, and in particular on the crosswalks as well. So big maintenance nightmare. So that was one reason that these pavers weren't good. The second one is you can see there's a utility trench that was dug at some point, either water main was replaced, gas main replaced, someone had to go in, fix their pipe, and they put asphalt on top. Very unsightly, doesn't really contribute to a complete streets aesthetic. And if we're talking about pavers shifting around differently in the frost heave, let's add a new material, asphalt, that's gonna act differently too. So again, another place where you can have your 1/4 inch vertical problems and really have ADA challenges. Next slide, please. So much of the same here, looking, you're on the east side or on the west side looking east. You can see the same utility trench, and you can see on this crosswalk here, they had to fix that water main at some point, and what they do, put a nice square rectangle of asphalt there. Again, running into the same ADA issues that we talked about before, change the material, the 1/4 inch lip, all of that.
Worse in the crossing, the bituminous becomes irregular over time
That's right.
and it creates tripping hazards.
Mhm.
So
So next slide, please. So here's a closer look at the 4-lane mid-block crossing. As you see, utility trench going right through, running into that 1/4 inch tripping hazard. The ramps don't have that tactile detectable warning strip. So if you are a person who has difficulty seeing, that tactile warning strip is the way they know that they are entering a conflict area with other vehicles or modes of transportation. So if that's not there, they could just be going into a potentially hazardous situation unknowingly. So that's a very big safety hazard and obviously not ADA compliant. In addition, you can see there's a nice, you should go back quickly. There's a parked van that's sitting there in that crossing. So again, really hard to see. If you're sitting at the crosswalk, you have to go out 8, 9 feet and literally stick your head out to make sure that you can cross. And that's it's not good. Next slide, please. So again, so we can see on this area of the project, we have the crossing. This is not even striped this time. It's just a different color of paver. Kind of hard to tell between the two at a glance, and a lovely utility trench going right through the middle, which we already talked about all the issues with that. Next slide, please. And I will say the same thing again. The tactile warning strip isn't there. The lovely utility trench, the pavers, we've kind of talked about this at length already. So next slide, please. And the last little bit is this is the sidewalk. The sidewalk is probably wide enough to meet PROAG compliance of provisions of accessibility guidelines, I think is what it's called. That's 4 feet. ADA width is 3 feet between the light post and the building. You probably met that, but you have to think about where the project is. This is a downtown core street in Waterbury. We're gonna have a lot of people coming to and from. You don't just want to meet the minimum. You need to exceed it so you can really accommodate all users. And a lot of these points, it's like you can look at a big checklist and go, we have gotten the minimum width, we have met the grade requirements, you can just check off your boxes. But the big thing that I want to drive here is you have to think about the implications. It's not just a checklist you're meeting to be conforming, and in case a lawyer comes in like 10 years later and goes, see, we did it, look here. It's about designing for who will actually use it. Don't design for a checklist, design for the people using the space. Next slide, please. So with all those issues that we talked about, this was a program that was funded through the Naugatuck program here administered by us at NVCOG. So the tree had a complete reconstruction. It was completed, I think, about 2 to 3 years ago at this point. So now we'll be getting into what was done. Next slide, please. So just very initial glance, it already, like it obviously looks nice and new and fresh, but there's a lot of good things happening here. And the first thing I'll really point out is the road is now is 2 lanes instead of 4, and we'll see more of that in better detail. But we have these bus stops here as well. I don't think there were shelters originally on East Main Street, so getting shelters included here is very good. But also we have this different materials, it's slightly different shade of gray where the bus is sitting. That is a reinforced concrete pad, because if you're gonna have a bus sitting there getting people on and off, on asphalt, the asphalt's gonna rut. And you're gonna run into issues with people getting on the bus, off the bus, and obviously people who might be crossing where they shouldn't be. It's just could lead to hazard situations with drainage as well. So having a nice sturdy concrete pad for the buses is important. Next slide, please. So again, Here, you can see a nice, better image of these bus stops located here. We got some nice pavers wrapping around it. We have a nice wide sidewalk. And an important thing here is street trees. There were obviously some street trees on Eastman Street beforehand, but getting them along the corridor is very important. Al was talking about this earlier. You want to have nice enclosure. As the street trees grow, you'll develop the enclosure, and that will create a different environment and get vehicles to slow down. In addition, we have urban heat island problems. A lot of cities are just made of bricks and pavement and other very dark things that will absorb heat and retain it. Any sort of greenery that you could include in your project helps reduce the heat island effect. It can help with drainage. If you have, you can get water. Obviously, the tree will take the water to grow. And just again, just make a general, more pleasing environment for everyone using the corridor. Next slide, please. So this is on the other side of the project. Again, we can see street trees running along it. We have like this thermoplastic brick pavers. As I mentioned, the brick pavers on the old project was a logistical nightmare for a multitude of reasons. So they went to normal asphalt, but you can still get a lot of the complete street elements done in other ways. And in this way, they used like a white like thermoplastic and stamped a brick pattern to get the point across. So this is still a place for all users. Helps make narrow the lanes to 11 feet. Helps designate on-street parking on either end. So it's just a very good overall design aesthetic. Next slide, please. This is in front of the UConn campus. Again, very nice wide sidewalk. We have these pavers on the end, and we have like this little green space. Again, the same idea of the urban heat island effect. This will reduce your impervious surface. You'll have less drainage to worry about, and more importantly, it just looks nice. It's better than just having a big sheet of asphalt or more sidewalk. It's good to get this greenery in and make the space more inviting for everyone. And you can see in the distance the sidewalk, the crossings have changed from just a normal striping to a stamped colored asphalt with white lines on either side. We'll be getting closer images of that in a little bit, but again, designating the crossing in a different way with a different material that will help alert motorists that this is a different place and they need to be accommodating for all these different kinds of users. Next slide, please. And this is in front of the Palace Theater, and we have these street trees as well as these planters. Obviously, you don't have to do trees everywhere. There are other forms of greenery you can incorporate into your project. And for here, these planters, obviously a little bit of greenery, but also provide a bit of a buffer in between vehicles and pedestrians, help give that sense of safety, because they can act like a bollard to a degree. Now, obviously not as strong, but you have a pot with however many pounds of soil in it, it will do something. So helps provide the welcoming presence for people on the street, as well as a little bit of safety benefit as well. Next slide, please. So this is in front of the Palace Theater, and this might seem a little odd. We have a sidewalk ramp that kind of looks like it's going nowhere. This is actually a designated drop-off zone for people going into and out of the Palace Theater. They have tons of events there, not just for shows, but they have like high school graduations, maybe even corporate functions as well. So having an area where people can pull off and then get on and off that is ADA accessible is important. And again, you can see the tactile warning strip here that if you're someone leaving the sidewalk into the road, you're crossing that tactile strip and you're entering an area with potential conflicts and you need to be more careful. Next slide, please. So this is possibly my favorite part of the entire project. This is the mid-block crossing. As we saw in the before, we had 4 lanes, the pavers were in sad shape and it was really treacherous to cross. Here, they took the parking lane and turned it into a bump out. So if you're a pedestrian crossing, you can easily get to the middle of the crossing and get a better view of what is coming your way. In addition, we have this rapid rectangular flashing beacon, or RFB here. This is a special actuation form, a form of actuation for crossings, where if you press the button, those 2 strobes really start flashing very brightly and grabs the attention of motorists very quickly. In addition, RFBs actually aren't that expensive in the grand scheme of things. They're only like $15,000 to $30,000 to put in the grand scheme of a project that can cost hundreds of thousands or even millions. That's nothing. You can get a lot of bang for your buck for installing RFBs, and in particular at mid-block crossings. And now the part that I potentially enjoy the most as an engineer is if you're designing a bump out, you will run into drainage issues, because if you have your water going along the road into a catch basin, and you put a big, put the bump out here with curbing, well, now where's the water gonna go? Well, now you have to regrade the street and you have to do all this stuff and that stuff. Or you can do what the designer did here, they made a little metal trench and made a little gap between the curb that is ADA compliant and the water can just run right through. No need to redesign the road to fuss around with your grades forever. You can just quickly incorporate make sure the drainage works with your new design and move on. Next slide, please. So even though we got this wonderful complete streets project on East Main Street, every project will have its hiccups. You will take many strides forward to make it a better spot, but you'll still run into some issues. And one issue that we thankfully spotted during the project and got rectified were the pavers. The pavers are in between the sidewalk and the road, acting as a snow shelf. And as Al mentioned earlier, everyone is a pedestrian at some point. If you're just parking on the street, you get out of your vehicle and you're crossing the pavers to go get a slice of pizza, you're interacting with these pavers. And unfortunately, these pavers weren't initially set correctly. They were very bumpy. There was a lot of the 1/4-inch tolerances were not met in multiple locations. So this is something to look out for in your project. If you're having pavers that honestly look great, help like if they're permeable pavers, you can help achieve your low impact development goals. They're fantastic, but you have to make sure you meet your ADA compliance. So this is something to look out for when you're designing building to make sure that these things get incorporated. And thankfully here, we were able to show up these pavers to meet that 1/4-inch tolerance. Next slide, please. So this is something else that we'll be talking about again later, is every complete streets project has to end somewhere. You can't complete street the entire city or the state. It starts and stops. And how do you tie in your complete street into a non-complete street? So here at the east end of East Main, or on the eastern side of the project limits on East Main Street, we have a very wide crossing. And now the designer, I personally think they probably did the best they could. They got the thermoplastic in there, they got the stamped asphalts, they tried marking it as a complete street the best they can, but this is challenging. And honestly, I don't have the answer right now of how they necessarily could have designed this better. I don't know if you have any insights, Bill, but
Well, my concern is always the transition from your older street pattern into your wonderful complete streets area. That's always the challenge, because you're dealing with, every city's gonna be different. Waterbury has unique infrastructure problems. You got older buildings, you got narrow areas, you got buildings built up close to the street, you got narrow sidewalks, you got a whole bunch of stuff going on. And the transition into where we can all enjoy it, hopefully equally, is the hardest part and could be the most dangerous part. And as I said earlier, those of us with disabilities are lower and slower. And particularly these transition areas, the hazards are higher for us. There's no question about that.
absolutely. So as you're looking at these projects, especially where they tie into existing conditions, really keep an eye out so people like Bill can use this area safely and make sure that users know that they're entering a complete street area as they enter within the new project limits.
Ask people, I volunteer to do this. It's like I'll come to your city and I'll ride around in a wheelchair, okay? If have resources with people with disabilities. It's okay to ask us.
Yeah.
People sometimes say, gee, I'm sorry I asked. Don't be afraid. I woke up with it this morning, babe. I'll wake up with it tomorrow too. It's okay. Okay, you're not making me feel bad, okay?
Yeah.
I feel better that you asked me.
Yeah.
Cause we'll be happy to come out and do it. And I'll tell you what I think is good or not so good. I worry about ramps. Ramps I talked about, you get cross pitch and you get horizontal vertical pitch and a ramp. If the ramp isn't built properly, as I'm going around a corner, the pitch of that ramp's gonna suck me right onto the street. Happens all the time, and I'm still pretty athletic up my upper body. I can fight that. But remember, it's not just Bill Volker, you got Mrs. McGillicuddy, my favorite senior citizen in every community. She's gonna be on a ramp trying to go around here or walking. That's gonna pull her right out, and especially in those transition areas where motorists, and by the way, there's certain things that concern me. There's a lot more people smoking marijuana, truthfully, there is, okay? Well, there are, okay? And people are not paying attention because they can get high in the middle of the afternoon somehow, and they feel it's there's higher hazard rate. I have a friend of mine who tows cars for a living. He says nearly every wreck he picks up, he smells it. Okay, it's, and I'm not crusading for or against anything. I'm just telling you what the reality is. The reality is there's higher number of people impaired driving their motor vehicles than there were before, and low and slow against that
What about
is a
these?
problem. Yeah, well, that's also a problem. But believe me, okay, There's no good news, okay?
Yeah.
But what I'm telling you is that those of us who are out there going lower and slower, the hazards are higher. Don't be afraid to ask us to take a look. There's gotta be people in your community. You have social services groups where you can come. There's people who would volunteer to come out and take a look at it. And show you where there are problems that people without disabilities wouldn't necessarily experience in the same way.
Oh, excellent. Next slide, please. So this is the last image I'll show you for this project. I took this image about 2 weeks ago, which is right after the torrential rainfall areas of this region got. I think Waterbury only had 8 to 9 inches, while a place like Oxford and Southbury got double that. So here, so we have the street crossing here. Obviously, we have the nice detective warning strip. We have the crosswalk. But the bottom warning strip, a lot of the runoff has deposited a lot of sand on top of the detectable warning strip itself. So if you're someone who relies on these to know if you're entering a conflict area, the detectable warning strip is no longer serving its function. So I know obviously we have all these situations like with Oxford and other like Southbury 2 weeks ago. You have very big fish to fry. You have bridges that are gone. You have culverts that are like hundreds of feet downstream. You have entire roadways that are gone, and those are very important issues. We can't forget about other uses of your roadways in supposedly less affected areas. Like here, we just have a pile of sediment on top of a warning strip. The cleanup process does take a long time. And you have to, like I said, deal with the big ones first, but you have to make sure your complete street stays a complete street throughout its lifespan.
Was this a state mandate? I noticed an awful lot of sidewalks are now handicap accessible. They're making them lower. Similar to this, is that a mandate or is that up to each individual community?
It's ADA. So, yeah.
If you're spending public's money, you have to comply with ADA standards. Okay, it's not like what it'd be like some crackpot administrator going, we're not gonna put any ramps here, we can't
Yeah.
afford it. Pardon me, you don't have a choice.
That's right.
You don't have a choice.
You know,
I see quite a few of them. It's a good thing.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you have to do it. Yeah.
Basically, if you do anything on a roadway over and above striping, you need to make the adjacent sidewalks ADA compliant.
And only one remark really from my perspective about ADA is a point of beginning. Okay, if ADA sets a set of what we call minimum standards.
Yep.
And that's where you have to start. What we're encouraging people to do is go out and experience it more and go beyond that where you think you need to, so.
There's some municipalities in the state that do what's called a walk audit, where they will actually take a group of people, some from CONDOT and their local organizations, that you can actually go with them as a group and inspect the obstacles to getting a walkable area. You'll actually walk the street and they'll point out things that are missing, like, some truncated dome missing. If there is not a pair of curb cuts, each comes in pairs with the ones with the truncated domes. They usually come in pairs. So they look for stuff like that. So if anybody's interested, you might want to check with your city or town or CONDOT and see if there's a walk audit that can be done in your area. The CONDOT pays for some of that with the community connectivity grant, as a matter of fact. So
Yes.
you might want to check into that.
Called the roadway safety audit.
Yes, Bobby, thank you.
All right, so next slide, please. So I'll be talking about a second example, but I want to just get an opportunity for everyone to ask questions about the East Main Street project in particular, from regard to complete streets. Any questions here or online? All right, hearing none, I'll move straight into my second example. This is Elm Street. This is located in Thomaston. This is a bit of a different example. This project is actually currently under design. So we saw East Main Street, the nice before, in middle and after. This is all just before and what's in design. So the approach I want to show with this example is how do you make a project that is a good project, but how do you improve it and transform it into a more true complete streets project? So next slide, please. So that's a nice, lovely before existing conditions photos out here. So first thing is the street is very wide. I believe the road is 14 to 16 foot travel lanes. And this is a nice little, like we have a brewery, a Clocktown Brewery on our right, and it will go into a residential street. a residential street does not need 14 to 16 foot lanes. You're gonna get very fast moving vehicles, up and down the corridor, and it'll just it creates unsafe conditions. As you can see here, there are sidewalks on both sides. The curb, like there's a driveway here where this photo is taken, the curb is intermittent. And as you'll see later on, the sidewalk is also a little intermittent. But here, the sidewalk is actually in relatively good condition. Next slide, please. So here, we just jumped down the corridor a little. We have this crossing here. We have this ADA sidewalk ramp. I would say it's okay. It is technically compliant, but the detective warning strip really should be pointing people where they should be crossing it. Because if you're visually impaired, you have your rectangle, you can center yourself on it and go. So if you were to do that here, you'd be setting yourself into the middle of the intersection where there's no crossing or no ramp waiting for you on the other side, which is a big hazard.
It's a little shallow from here, actually.
It looks shallow
As
too.
I'm approaching it in my wheelchair, I'm thinking, I'm gonna take a right, then I'm gonna get pulled.
Yeah.
That's what I see. It looks a little shallow.
So like the ramp is new, but there might be some deficiencies with it. I believe the distance between the pole and the edge of sidewalk is probably 4 feet, so that's okay. But again, some things could be improved along this section. Next slide, please. Talking about intermittent sidewalks, here we have the sidewalk just kind of stops. If you're like pedestrians don't just evaporate at the end of sidewalks, you don't have to worry about them anymore. No, they gotta go somewhere. So in this case, they'd be going on some wet grass and into the roadway, which as you can see, is now a little shoddy at this point. We have drainage issues, we have ponding off the side of the road, there's no curbing there to help direct the water anywhere. So it's kind of with the hazardous situations for motorists, because obviously ponding can lead in severe rain events like we saw 2 weeks ago. You can have hydroplaning and other safety concerns. But also, if you have pedestrians now forced to use the roadway, that's a source of conflict that perhaps a motorist isn't expecting, and also they need to do some avoidance, and we don't want to ever have that situation. So complete your sidewalk networks, and that's something this project will be addressing. Next slide, please. Here's the other issue. Here's a sidewalk that is going across the driveway that also has its fair share of drainage issues. Where if you're going to cross, first of all, there isn't like a sidewalk for you to cross on to help tell a motorist who's turning into this driveway that there may be a potential conflict with pedestrians. Also, as a pedestrian, you just have to get your feet wet, and that's just not acceptable. You shouldn't be designing for one standard for vehicles, another standard for pedestrians saying, they can deal with some water.
And for a wheelchair user, as I approach this, I'm like, I don't, first of all, there's probably potholes there I can't see.
Mhm.
And it's also, it's a million problems for me. It's a mess.
Yeah.
So. I'm gonna try to actually figure out a way to get into the parking lot earlier and go around it. Well, I could.
Yeah. Mhm. So next slide, please. So this is like we made this a little quick cross section to show the existing condition. As you can see, the road is 16 feet wide, way too wide, as I addressed earlier. With you can get high speeds. The road is actually relatively straight, so there's no issues to take your wet foot and put it down and zoom right through a residential neighborhood. Thankfully, as you can see, there are sidewalks on both sides of the road, intermittent, unfortunately, but something is better than nothing. But there's still a lot of improvement that can be made here. So we got the sidewalk, got a 4-foot snow shelf, the road, and then the same thing on the other side. So next slide, please. So we got this design from the designer from the town for the new roadway, and this is through our Naugatuck program. And this is just the cross section they sent us. So what they wanted to do is they put a sidewalk on one side, get rid of the snow shelf, 5 to 6 foot wide bike lane, 10 to 11 foot travel lane, which is fantastic. And then the same thing on the other side. So they pulled this information from a report that NVCOG published, I believe, in 2019 or 2020. We are currently building Naugatuck Greenway, going all the way from Derby to Winstead, I believe, or Torrington. And Elm Street was listed as a possible routing for the Naugatuck Greenway as it comes up along the river. And in the report, we recommended bike lanes. So the designer did do the due diligence. They found the report, found the bike lanes, said, they want bike lanes here. We're doing a project here, get the bike lanes here. Perfect. But again, like I was talking about earlier with a checklist, it's not about designing to a checklist. It is, you look at something and go, can we do something better? So when we received this application, we had the thought of, can we do something better? And bike lanes are a good form of mobility, but they can be intimidating, especially if they're not separated with bollards or flex posts or even like concrete barriers. Riding on the side of a road is intimidating. You're going along your bike and you see a car like 2 feet right next to you, zooming by at 25, 30 miles an hour. That's freaky. So nothing we did with this project is we actually went back to the designer and worked with them in the town to come up with a different concept for bike mobility. So she moves to the next slide. This is the new cross section that we came up with working with the town and the designer. We still 5-foot wide sidewalks, 4-foot snow shelf. We have the lanes going to 11 feet 6 inches each, and that includes the strapping. So it's really going to be in reality a little narrower, more like 11 feet. And then we have a bike path on the eastern side of the road. This will be a 9-foot wide bike path with curb separation. So you got 6 inches difference to help provide that separation. Because separation can come many forms. You can have the barriers, you can have the bollards, but you can also have a vertical separation, and both of those are good. So here we were able to get curbing, a granite curb in, and a bike path on the that's 9 feet wide. And then because it is only a bike path, it is not a multimodal path because it is not wide enough. You still have to design for other users. So we still have the sidewalk on both sides of the road.
One thing that you mentioned earlier, we talked about the 11-foot lanes, and I see you have here. And the actor that we didn't talk about is the local fire chief, or the local fire marshal. And who probably hate 11-foot lanes. It's really about the right of way width and how you accommodate them. So did you have any experience in either of these design challenges for interacting with fire departments?
I believe he showed this to the town. The town showed this to the fire chief. Didn't actually have any issues with this, which is good. And something that I'll be getting to now actually is because you're doing a lot of changes in the complete street, it is good to get as many people involved as early as possible. Because you're like because for a normal roadway project, you just repave the road, you're not really changing a whole lot, you can kind of just call it a day and just move on with your design. But if you're proposing more radical changes of like like a bike path in the street that's vertical separated with a curb, there's a lot more moving pieces here. So what we did is, like I said, we worked with the designer, we worked with the town, but then if you go to the next slide. We did I didn't get it one time myself. Here's a plan view of what we're proposing. But we created all these drawings to show at a public information meeting that we did very early on in the process. Normally, you might do a public information meeting when you have a preliminary design. Designer just buttoned down, got something in CAD, like a little more than conceptual. They have some engineering details sprinkled in, and then they go to a public information meeting to get the public buy-in. We want to do that first. Because we can sit here, talk about what we think is good for this street, what this community is, but we're gonna do our design and then we're gonna go and work somewhere else. We don't live here. So it's important to get to people who live on the street to get their feedback and input about what they want. Because honestly, we support this bike path concept, but maybe they would prefer a multimodal trail instead of a sidewalk off street. So it's good to take it to the public early so you can get their feedback and make the project feel like it's theirs. Because when the project feels like it's theirs, you now have more advocates for complete streets. So next slide, please. So this is the public information meeting where we held that night in Thomaston Town Hall. We had a very good turnout. I think we had like 30 to 50 people. And that shows that the public was invested in the project and wanted to see what would come out of it. So next slide again. And the big thing is, like I said, we worked with the town. This is the first selectman, Ed Moan of Thomaston. He was also presenting at the public information meeting, and it's good to have backing for all these projects so you can help present them to the public and really get people on board. So after the public information meeting, the public was in favor of what we showed and what we talked about. We did talk about many different alternatives, but they did eventually land on the bike path in the roadway concept. So if you go to the next slide, this is the application we received from the designer. You can see a lot of our comments were weaved in to create more of a complete street. We do have on the top plan view on the left, we have, this is before the bike path, the NRG comes in. So we have on-street parking on the western side. At the intersection, we have a nice little chicane to get cars to slow down as they enter the bike path area. And then we have the bike path running up all along the entire eastern side of the street. And if you go to the next slide, here are the two cross sections, again, for the parking area and for the bike path itself. Something that we did get as a comment from the residents along the street is they wanted to see They wanted the amenities for complete streets. They wanted to see lighting. They wanted to see street trees. And this is all stuff that we included into the design and the cross section as well. So this is just a good example of how you can take a street or take a project, turn it into a more complete streets project with all the different stakeholders and residents communicating and getting on the same page to create something better. So with that, I'll take any questions that anyone has about this example for Elm Street, either here or online.
If I could just add a bit more context.
Yes.
To your question about the fire department, obviously, you're right, the emergency response is one of the main challenges when it comes to designing these streets.
Yep.
And moving fire trucks past cars pulled over to the side of the road is really challenging when you have 211-foot lanes and no
Right.
shoulder. In this particular case, we're talking about a short section that is entirely residential, that has lots of cross streets. And so almost anywhere the fire department would need to go, they wouldn't be traveling down this road, they would be traveling to this road. But that is very context specific to this piece. And
Right.
certainly something we have to take into consideration, especially when we're designing near fire department or fire stations. You know, their mobility is important. It's something that needs to be
Yeah.
consideration early and often.
It's an argument I've lost many times, in 4 years, but the idea that the narrowing of the lanes does not necessarily mean you've narrowed the right of way or the paved areas. They can find ways to do that. The narrowing of the lane to me is, and this is what I would say to fire marshal so and so. You're trying to slow everybody down. You're trying to make this perform better. Those guys don't care because at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're running to your house to put the fire out or get people out of the building, whatever it is, and they don't want to be impaired in any way. I understand that. But, you know, you travel other places, travel other countries, narrow roads everywhere. Go to
Yeah.
Germany, narrow roads everywhere.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it for years and it still works. And of course, I've tried that argument a few times and lost that one too, but it's an important thing to take, as you said, get as many actors in the room as you possibly can. And maybe there's a way to mitigate, because narrow lanes does not necessarily mean less paved area.
Mhm.
You still have the cross section. There's a way to do that, so.
Yeah, they use the same argument with roundabouts and there's a solution for roundabouts. You can do truck aprons, so it isn't necessarily that restrictive as it looks, but I mean, the thing to do, of course, is the points of emphasis we have here that I hope are woven throughout this discussion is communicate with the players and design. It's all about design. Those are the cues that people will take. So if you want somebody to behave in a certain way, don't put up a sign, design it so it is that way. And you're gonna have a chat with the fire truck people about things like roundabouts. There is a project undergoing in Windsor right now where they want to do what is an unusual roundabout. It's called a dog bone, where they have roundabouts at either end of a short stretch of road. So the fire marshal, the fire department's freaking out over it because they want access. So they talk about stuff like truck aprons on the roundabout. And it's just an area that it looks like pavers or rough pavement or whatever. And you can make it work, but you have to, people have to talk to each other. You have to be willing to meet one another where they are.
All right, so there's a couple more points that we're gonna hammer at the very end. You can go to the next slide. Is basically two big things that we want to reiterate here. And the first one we already alluded to is transitions. Where complete streets end and traditional design resumes, you have to pay attention to those areas. Like Bill's saying, that you can start getting weird cross slopes but they just become, like, users just become more vulnerable. So as you're going through your project, really scrutinize endpoints. Make sure that motorists know when they're entering the area or entering your complete street, that they know it's a complete street, that it's not an all of a sudden abrupt change. But also make sure that the users on the complete street have somewhere to go after. And then the second one is safety elements. Any point you have any safety feature, spend some time thinking. Don't just check off the box, say we have made an ADA ramp, pack it up and let's go home.
Yeah.
Really think about, are you creating a safe element at your bid block crossings, at your sidewalk ramps, at your intersections, anywhere that you have conflict point between multiple users? Just give it a pondering, give it a think, and make sure that you're designing the best thing possible for that area. Either of you have anything to add to this?
No, I think that sums it up.
Yeah,
pretty well.
I think what you said, maybe one of the most important things about getting as many people involved, you as well.
Mhm.
Figure out who you need in the room.
Yeah.
Right, get the actors in, bring the public in, bring important people in the community in, bring stakeholders in, bring the users in. Downtown merchants, lots of groups that you might not automatically think about. People who have businesses in those areas where you're gonna make these improvements, get them in the room. That doesn't mean necessarily gonna agree with you. You want them there though, because you want them to see what you're doing as well. Because that kind of cooperation can generate better solutions, and people will ask questions that you never thought of yourself. People, those of us who did local planning for many, many years, public hearings go late at night sometimes, but some of the stuff you hear, you wouldn't have thought of. You're hearing from the people who live
Yeah.
there, who experience it every day, and can give you ideas and observations about what's really going on that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise be able to get. So get as many people into the room and these things as you possibly can, so. And make sure that DOT, those guys are in the room as well.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, very important.
Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so next slide. I just want to give a quick plug. We here at NVCOG, we're working on a Complete Streets guidebook.
yeah.
This will be releasing next month in October. It's something that we've been working on for a year, if not more. This is designed to be a resource where if you want to include different traffic calming elements, you can quickly go to this guide and just kind of get like a quick hits of like what this feature should be used for, and maybe what it shouldn't be. So we're talking about like chicanes, speed humps, speed bumps, transit streets, sidewalk ramps. We're talking about the enclosure, the enclosure ratio as well. All sorts of good stuff in here. So look out for that in the next month or so. But with that, that is all we have today. We should go to the last slide, Desiree, please. So again, thank you everyone for attending. We're really happy they all turned out here. Like we iterated many times, we're here to build advocates for complete streets. Whenever you see a project and you see something that is like has been done or is being designed that doesn't look right for a complete streets perspective, say something.
Yeah.
And you can help get the people who are working and designing the project to make it a more accessible place for everyone. So with that, I'll open the table once more for any questions overall about anything that we presented today, either here in person or online. Yes,
Yeah, it's kind of trivial, but Bill, I didn't understand your point about the pitch of the sidewalk
Oh.
being the wrong way. I'm trying to visualize it and. it
Because you
wasn't
don't
working.
experience it, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
There's cross pitch on sidewalks. okay?
From left to right.
Well, it depends on where the gutter is, okay? Cross pitch is on a sidewalk, to get the water off the sidewalk, and it can be, you can be minimal. You won't feel it if you're walking, you won't feel it as a pedestrian. I do it in a wheelchair every time I'm on it. It'll pull me, whatever way it's pitched, it pulls me. Any like rails to trails, they all have cross pitch on it. There's one side of the trail or the other. There's a stream, there's a water body, there's some way that's where the stormwater is gonna go. They pitch it, and any engineer will tell you, that if you put a little tiny bit of cross pitch in there.
Yep.
You get the water to flow off.
Yep.
Okay,
It's the same concept as a crown.
what it does though, it forces me to adapt to that, okay?
Mhm.
So it might be easier for me to be on the upside rather than the lower side. It depends on the surface, depends on where I am, and sometimes I can be on one side or the other. But my point was that there's no rules of the road here. Don't tell me I gotta be on the right side of the road on my
Right.
wheelchair, pardon me, bullshit, okay? I'm gonna be where I can be to feel comfortable out here. I gotta use this facility. I'm not gonna struggle to come out here. It's a, most of these, I know we talked about the bike lanes on roadways. I get that. And some of those would be almost exclusively for bicycles. I get all that, okay? But it's many of these facilities, it's for multi-purpose, multi-users. And all I'm saying is that I'm trying to make people aware that there are various challenges. I talked about ramps before too, on the corner. There's a pitch out to the road, there's a cross pitch, I'm gonna go around this way. I talked about the one that was too shallow, which means there's no real good landing area for me above the ramp. As I'm going around the corner, that pitch is gonna pull me out into the street. Okay, and by the way, one of the design problems for me is that a lot of, God bless them all, engineers, public works directors, think ramps are there to get snow and ice off the street. No, it isn't. Okay? No, it's not, okay? And they'll put a catch basin at the end of the ramp. I've seen that many times. Well, guess what? Okay, no, okay?
Yeah.
Right? You
Mhm.
know,
Yep,
right?
I've seen it too.
Yeah, good bones are sometimes bad bones, right? So that's why I talk about the pitch. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
thank you.
The thing
So
else,
it's more specific, it's not necessarily on the right side of the road or the left, well.
Right.
East side or
No,
west
it
side,
depends on
it's house design.
where's the gutter?
Where the
Okay,
water is.
where do they want the water to go?
Yeah,
And it's naturally pulls me in that direction, which is okay, except understand that everybody's gotta, I got sometimes gotta fight that, and I gotta be on the other side of the street, so other side of the sidewalk.
the thing I'll mention with putting my engineering hat on is roadways are typically done with a 1 to 2% cross slope, which are designed for cars, but you have like a sidewalk. The only thing is it just can't be as flat as a pancake. I don't think you can even build it if you tried. As flat as a pancake, because then the water will just sit there, pool, ice, etc.
Freeze,
But you don't need a lot to get the water off. All you need is like 0.5% of a cross slope. Now you could like do 0.1% of a cross slope, and then your contractor's gonna find out where you live and send you some notes. But if you do like 0.5%, that's enough to get the water off, but it really mitigates I hope that the effect that you get in your winter when you're getting pulled off the road. You don't need to do 1%, 2% cross slopes or sidewalks.
No, it's not awful, it just means that people in wheelchairs need sometimes to adapt to a certain particular situation. And maybe with that cross slope, maybe there's a like pothole or a root lift or who knows what. I mean, it's, I gotta be on the side of the road because this is where I can comfortably use this facility, which I'm entitled to the same as everybody else is.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have two questions, but I'll start with one, and we'll see how much time we have. This one is related to, I thought it was powerful when you talked about the maintenance of the complete street and like the sand that you showed. So, and I know I had a conversation with Al about this at one point, but I'm curious, like just a few maintenance priorities when you're thinking about maintaining accessible complete streets.
I'll let you, let both you speak this as well, but my perspective would be yet to get the areas that people go to cleared first. And this isn't, oh, just get the roads clear so cars can drive, it's people who are walking on the streets. They need to use the transportation system as well. So I would say in events of like obviously you have like big rainfall, like lots of runoff and that sorts of thing, clear all the streets for everyone first. Don't just think of the roads, think about the sidewalks as well, because sometimes maybe in a big storm event, a tree falls on someone's driveway, blocks them in. Their only way to get somewhere is walking. So the road being cleared necessarily isn't important to them. What's important is walking, because everyone walks somewhere.
The communities have to function, and that's the priority. So Oxford's got a lot to take care of before they worry about sand and a ramp,
Yeah.
and I'm, maybe stubborn, but not unreasonable, and wouldn't expect that all the complete streets ramps would be cleared before the culvert would have to be replaced before the road could be reconstructed. So the thing that I worry about though is in a rush to reinstall infrastructure, that if there were really good, safe, complete streets issues there, designs in there, that they not be like forgotten. That's,
Yeah.
that to me would be the issue, is not today, I can't get across here because there's sand in a ramp. I know you're rebuilding a culvert, but can't you clean this? I don't care about that. But what I care about is when they rebuild all that stuff, did they put in all this ADA stuff and all the ramps and all the things that might have been there before? And in the rush to do it, sometimes I get it, again, the place has to function. And maybe they can just get it functioning and they gotta wait until next year because there might be some emergency funding coming from. Of course, those of us who did this understand this stuff.
Mhm.
The general public doesn't always,
Yeah.
right? We gotta get the road open, but next year, maybe the feds are gonna give a lot of money. So it can be applied to doing something better or more complete. And we know the communities have to function, so that's where I start. I get it.
absolutely. Yeah, no, if it's all about communication, if people understand one another and each other's needs. There are places where, Sweden, for example, when it snows, the first thing they do is clear the sidewalks, because that's how people get to that's how they get to your cars. Here we do the streets first, so that's, in some ways, that seems a little backward. But by talking with one another and seeing what each of our perspectives, then we get a better idea of how it is we can A, design, and B, maintain design so that it works for everybody. One of the upcoming things that we're gonna have to deal with is who's using the sidewalk. Right now, places are getting back to having electric scooters. When they first came out, it was kind of all hell broke loose and everybody was behaving like a 15-year-old boy with a new toy and they were just going nuts. Now they're a little more responsible in using it, but you have to think about things like regulation of speed. If you're a pedestrian, you're walking at 3 miles an hour, which is a pretty good clip, and somebody zooms past you at 15 miles an hour. It doesn't sound like a lot. But man, that is, you notice it when you're a pedestrian, even if somebody's going whizzing past you at 8 miles an hour. That's almost 3 times your speed. So you have to keep those kinds of things in mind when you're designing complete streets facilities. So suddenly that makes a 10-foot sidewalk not seem unreasonable at all, where you can do it.
Any other questions here or online?
I do have a second.
Oh, yes.
Just funding opportunities available for people who want to do complete streets or like retrofit. complete streets.
So the first thing that comes to mind for municipality is the community connectivity program. I believe that they will be doing another solicitation this year. I think they'll be talking about it in November. Again, it's a good way to, like, it's in the name, community connectivity. It's about connecting your community, and it's about getting complete streets elements onto local projects. I think the funding is a little smaller, so you're not talking about like big overhauls, but like fixing one of the little things in a corridor. I can speak for us here. We have the local, you have the LOTSIP program here, the local capital transportation improvement program. Both examples I showed today were funded by LOTSIP. So honestly, we have a perspective for getting good complete streets work. And of course, all the other COGs in the region have LOTSIP funding as well that they can use to apply for complete streets. And there's a new program called TRIP. This is more for rural towns. Slightly less complete streets, but if a rural town has maybe a little area that they want to incorporate complete streets aspect, that is something that will be coming out again in around November or so. And those are the 3 off the top of my head. I don't know if you guys have any others you'd like to add.
Yeah, and I think the community connectivity grant is a really good place. And a good place to start too is if you're thinking about a project, don't neglect the road safety audit, because that is a good place to start. You can get some money for that, and you can start there and you see where opportunities and hazards are.
That's a key point. Get your roadway safety audit done. It greatly enhances your chance of getting a successful application. And the DOT will pay for it typically.
There's also a lot of federal money out there right now focused on this type of work. Especially for larger projects, the State Streets and Roads for All program is pretty innovative in supporting this. The Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhood Equity and Access program, similarly, are new programs. They're actually technically still pilot programs that do this type of work. There's quite a bit of federal dollars out there right now doing this too.
Any other questions?
Oh, safe routes to school.
Yes,
That's
how can
another
you forget?
program. Yeah, I know,
How could
yeah.
you forget that one?
Yeah, DOT is supporting safe routes to school, so you want to look into that too, in addition to your road safety audit.
All right, seeing that there's no more questions, again, thank you everyone for coming. We're glad to see that there are many people out there who want to become advocates for complete streets work, either if you want to add to your knowledge base or create your own knowledge base for future projects that you encounter. So again, thank you for coming, and of course, we'll be here after if you're here in person for any questions that you might have. But again, thanks for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, you guys.